Drugs are bad. This is an indisputable fact. But wait, let's back up a step. Only illegal drugs are bad. Except who decides which drugs are bad and illegal? And what criteria are they using to make their decisions? And what about legal drugs, like opioid painkillers, that are very bad and destroy lives? Folks, we're having technical issues. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Okay, drugs are bad. This is an indisputable fact. But wait, let's back up a step. Only illegal drugs are bad. Except who decides which drugs are bad and illegal? And what criteria are they using to make their decisions? And what about legal drugs, like opioid killers, that are very, very bad and destroy lives? Like so many of our society's problems, there are no easy answers for solving the dilemma of drug abuse and drug use. But after 50 years of ineffectiveness, we now know what does not work, and that is America's infamous war on drugs. From the time Richard Nixon made the initial call to arms in 1971, the United States government has spent $1 trillion fighting an unwinnable war on drugs that has done more harm than good to our country. Since this war was declared, the entire focus and strategy has been on the criminalization of drug use. Let's get those bad guys off the streets and make America a safer place. On the surface, this sounds pretty good. Nobody wants ruthless, violent drug cartels running rampant or greedy pushers hooking curious children outside their elementary school, right? But when we explore beyond the scare tactics that prey on people's emotions to drive them to the voting booth, we see that the true impact of America's anti-drug actions are detrimental, not helpful. The Global Commission of Drug Policy is an American-European organization founded in 2011 with a mission to inspire better drug policy globally. The current chairperson of this organization is Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and previous chairs have been former presidents of Switzerland and Brazil. The reports put out by the Global Commission agree with the conclusions of many other watchdog organizations with less prestigious staff lists, namely that America's war on drugs has been an utter and complete failure. After 50 years, we have seen no reduction in drug use, drug sales, drug costs, nor drug availability. The government's tough-on-crime drug policies have mainly served to increase two things: U.S. incarceration rates and the cost to U.S. taxpayers. First, let's look at the people who are being locked up on drug-related charges, which is a whopping 1/5 of the overall prison population. And surprise, most of these prisoners are not drug lords. They're not manufacturers or dealers or even hardcore addicts that are committing crimes either to buy drugs or because they're high on drugs. Arrests for simple possession have steadily risen to become 10 times higher than the number of arrests for drug sales. And according to the ACLU, a little more than half of drug arrests are for possession of marijuana, a plant so benign that its recreational use has been legalized in 19 states and counting. Whether or not you agree that cannabis is a healthy choice for human consumption, it's hard not to laugh or perhaps cry at the way use of this drug has been demonized into a crime so great that up until last year, the penalty for possession of 16 ounces of marijuana in New York State was the equivalent to that of possessing a bomb or machine gun. And the penalty for selling the same small amount was equivalent to illegally selling 10 firearms. Such ridiculous legislation sends the absurd message that pot is as harmful than guns. And though New York State marijuana laws were reformed somewhat in 2021, it wasn't by a hell of a lot. When it comes to cannabis, the discrepancy between state and federal laws only adds to the confusion and illogical criminalization. And the current presidential administration has done nothing to reform this situation. Among his many campaign promises, President Jim Crow, oopsie again, I meant Joe Biden, has not only neglected to criminalize cannabis on a federal level and grant clemency to those serving prison sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, but arrests for marijuana possession have actually increased during his time in office. So too have the draconian sentences being imposed upon offenders. Given the appalling situation here in America, it is a rather striking feat of hypocrisy that both Joe Biden and former top cop Kamala Harris have been so outspoken when it comes to Brittany Griner, the 7-time Women's National Basketball Association All-Star player who was just sentenced to a 9-year prison term in Russia. In a statement issued by the White House, Joe Biden said, "Today, American citizen Brittany Griner received a prison sentence that is one more reminder of what the world already knew. Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittany. It's unacceptable, and I call on Russia to release her immediately so she can be with her wife, loved one, friends, and teammates." Yes, the audacity of Russia in sentencing an American citizen to prison for the crime of possessing less than 1 gram of cannabis oil is most definitely a travesty of justice. But how does this come as a shock to the leaders of the world's largest penal colony? The number of people incarcerated for drug offenses in the United States exceeds the total amount of prisoners serving time for any and all crimes in Western Europe. And the harsh mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses have fueled our nation's prison overpopulation problem. Russia's sentencing of Brittany pales in comparison to the harsh sentences imposed on American citizens right here at home. Case in point, the Mississippi Court of Appeals just upheld a life sentence for 38-year-old Alan Russell for being in possession of less than 2 ounces of cannabis. Now, because of his 2 prior felony convictions, Russell was deemed a habitual offender, which, of course, comes with a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without eligibility for parole, probation, or any other form of early release. And then there's the case of John Knott, who received 2 life sentences plus 20 years. John had no prior convictions, but he was charged with conspiracy to distribute marijuana. The charges against John Nock date back to alleged crimes committed between 1984 and 1993. Upon learning he was the target of a DEA investigation, John fled the country. John was tracked down in Paris after his alleged co-conspirators took plea deals in exchange for testifying against him. After negotiating with France, John was eventually extradited to the United States under an agreement that he would not face more than 20 years in jail. But as soon as he landed on U.S. soil, prosecutors superseded his indictment. In 2000, John was given 2 life sentences plus 20 years after prosecutors tacked on the dubious charges of conspiracy to import marijuana and conspiracy to money launder. John and others allege that the court used imaginary weights and sums to inflate the charges against him. Despite being an upstanding prisoner with no incidents and serving as a role model for other inmates, including teaching trade classes and developing ACE courses to help benefit prisoners once they are released, President Barack Obama denied John Nock clemency. Fortunately, John did receive a presidential commutation, but by President Donald Trump on his last full day in office. It should be noted that the 1994 crime bill that President Joe Biden proudly takes credit for spearheading is largely responsible for our nation of mass incarceration and America's harsh drug enforcement policies. Biden once bragged that his crime bill did everything but hang jaywalkers. But it seems that when it comes to his own family, justice works a little differently. Among his many other crimes, both alleged and proven, Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has a confirmed history of drug use, yet no history of drug arrest or incarceration. While this is no huge surprise in a family so powerful, Hunter's good fortune sets the tone for American justice in general, and drug arrests more specifically. It is well known that our penal system favors citizens with the means to pay fines, fees, and expensive legal counsel, turning members of impoverished communities into the fodder that feeds our prison industrial complex. But even more problematic are the racial disparities that cast a shadow on every facet of our criminal justice system. When it comes to the war on drugs, a 2018 report from the Center for American Progress gives us a heartbreaking list of statistics to show the injustices suffered by Black Americans in the United States. I will quote just a few of these numbers. Black Americans make up nearly 30% of all drug-related arrests, despite accounting for only 12.5% of all substance abuse users. Black Americans are nearly 6 times more likely to be incarcerated for drug-related arrests than their white counterparts, despite equal substance usage rates. In the federal system, the average Black defendant convicted of a drug offense will serve nearly the same amount of time, around 58.7 months, as a white defendant would for a violent crime, which would be around 61.7 months. Prosecutors are twice as likely to pursue a mandatory minimum sentence for a Black defendant than a white defendant charged with the same offense. Whatever the color of an offender's skin, it is a very expensive endeavor for both state and federal governments to arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate these vast numbers of nonviolent drug users. And it is American taxpayer money that must foot the bill. Another huge cost of drugs and addiction falls on a struggling healthcare system that must treat the diseases associated with drug use, such as emergency care, HIV, and even treatment. Our nation suffers both a financial and emotional toll, with overdose being the leading cause of accidental death in the United States. According to the Centers for Disease Control, there were over 107,000 fatal overdoses in the United States in 2021, the highest number of deaths from overdoses ever recorded in a single year. Obviously, our 50 years of war waged on drugs has done nothing to save the lives of the addicted. You may have noticed how I keep repeating the mantra that America's war on drugs has been a failure. But has it really? Our government's efforts have not failed. The true intent was never to solve the problem of drug distribution and consumption, but rather to use such legislation to control and beat down certain American populations. Remember how President Nixon implemented the war on drugs back in 1971? Allow me to read a portion of an interview with Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Eckelman, that was conducted over 20 years after the fact. Quote, "You want to know what this was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black. But by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." End quote. Over the last 50 years, subsequent politicians have only built upon the foundation that Nixon laid down for them. Demonizing the drug use of certain groups and communities is still a common fear-mongering tactic. And the wealthy elite of Washington, D.C., and both political parties, well, they benefit financially from driven privatization, which is a topic worthy of its own monologue and its own show, which we will soon be doing. In short, America's unsuccessful war on drugs has succeeded in maintaining our nation's power structure behind closed doors. Yet there is hope on the horizon. The American people are beginning to see through the lies, and public opinion on drug policies might eventually move politicians in a better and perhaps more beneficial direction when it comes to combating our country's drug problems. But what can we do to effectively address drug use and abuse? The Global Commission of Drug Policy that I introduced earlier has a few very logical and intelligent suggestions. They have identified 5 pathways that will lead to true advancement in the way our nation handles the drug war. While we don't have time to explore all 5 today, I want to point out that the organization's #1 solution is to, quote, "put people's health and safety first," end quote. In a nutshell, this means to change the priority from punishing drug users to keeping them healthy with life-saving and cost-saving programs, such as safe injection facilities and syringe access services, programs which also serve as a means to provide the education, treatment, and resources that people need to stop being drug users. It is estimated that there are almost 21 million Americans suffering from at least one addiction, and yet only 10% of them receive any treatment. This is a sad situation that must be rectified. And today we will be speaking with a guest who is helping to do just that. Khristopher Blue has been in the human services and mental health field since 2003. Mr. Blue works with recovering drug addicts, in addition to providing his community with a myriad of important mental and social health services. I am very interested to learn about his experiences in a field that doesn't get nearly as much attention as it rightfully deserves. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. I'm Sean St. Hart, and this is, of course, Coup Save America. I will see you on the other side. We'll be right back.
Hello, this is Coup Save America producer, Mac. I am coming on to say that unfortunately, our guest for today has canceled at the last minute. Let me find his email to explain why we cannot continue the show. He said that a client is scheduled for an appointment that starts in about 10 minutes. The scheduler put him on there to satisfy a court requirement, and I will be unable to log in for the interview and we'll have to reschedule. So I'm sorry, we apologize for this very much, and thank you for listening to Sean's monologue, and have a wonderful day.